Are you starting for us, or should I start?
No, you go ahead, man. It's your show.
All right.
I'm just an adjunct here.
It's our show, I thought. Well, the show you've been waiting for. I'm just going to self-claim it. The Situation Room, as you know, is actually a TV show by Wolf Blitzer and Pamela Brown. Here, you don't get Pamela Brown and Wolf Blitzer, but you get Firas and Ram. And the idea is to talk about everything that's happening in the geopolitical environment, politics, all the uncertainties that have come through recently with the new administration, paint the big picture, talk about how that actually impacts everything we do in our lives. I think we're focused on ophthalmology, but on a biotech basis, everything that's going on right now has an impact on capital deployment, the risk analysis, through how people are viewing things. And we have three experts here today with us to help us have this conversation. I'm going to let them make the introductions for themselves, and then we'll start getting into some details.
Perfect. So I'm Cameron Taylor. I'm a managing director for the BofA investment banking team, focus on a range of therapeutic areas, but I think you've all known, spent a lot of time in ophthalmology. Pleasure to be here, and thank you for organizing today.
Hi, my name is Laura Feinleib. I'm a managing director at Redmile Group. We are a healthcare dedicated investment firm with the vast majority of our focus in biotech and small cap biotech. We invest across private and public with the overall long-term fundamental thesis view.
So I'm not Derrick Li. I'm James Murray, filling in for Derrick, who I think also got stuck in Newark. I'm a co-founder and managing partner of Excite Ventures with Firas Rahal, where we invest in early-stage ophthalmology technologies across the spectrum, so drugs, devices, diagnostics, anything that touches or relates to the eye we want to know about and potentially invest in.
I think I introduced myself earlier, but hey, I always open and close, so I'm standing between you and a drink again. And I always call this group the Last of the Mohicans, and this is maybe the biggest Last of the Mohicans group we've ever had. Good for you.
And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Ram Palanki, Chief Commercial Officer at Regenerative Bio. We're a publicly traded company. Have been around for a long time, and I think my colleague, Steve Pacola, talked a little bit about us today, so I won't get into it. With that, I'm gonna start to set the stage, and I've actually requested my friend Cameron here to bring some data forward because he's an investment banker. He has access to the latest stuff that's happening on a macro and micro environment basis financially. We're going to get into that, but Cameron, the basic stats today are the public equity issuance is at the lowest. Private equity markets have exhausted their funds in the last 5 years. Right? They've been deploying a lot of cash. Market performance for biotech generally has been very sad.
But getting better.
Yeah, it's getting better. But generally speaking, it's been sad, right? And the M&A landscape has been actually way more favorable to China than the US recently. So, you take those big picture items, maybe you can share what's happening in the financial world. You have the clicker, hopefully. I'll get you the clicker.
Hopefully it works.
So let's set the stage, and then we'll get into the discussion.
All right, so first, from a performance perspective, I think, where I talk about things getting better. And I think a lot of times, right, we focus on the XBI, we focus on DRG index. And so actually what we've done is separate into commercial stage biotech companies, companies that have filed and prepped, as well as then pre-commercial biotech companies by stage. And so what you'll see actually is that, earlier on in the year, those red triangles down at the bottom, it painted a really tough picture for all of biotech, right? And particularly for those that were pre-commercial, right? Which oddly enough are the same companies that need to be fed, that need funding. What we have had though, right, I think since the depths of sort of the post-Liberation Day fall is things have gotten a little bit better. There has been a degree of normalization, but still we do see pre-commercial companies dramatically lagging commercial stage peers. So what do we take away from that is it still is a market where, many of the investors are, what have you done for me lately? We are still seeing nice performance from companies after they get some of their clinical events. But nonetheless, it finds, many companies in clinical development still find themselves under pressure. And this is frankly, right after a few years of relatively significant pressure in the overall biotech field. But nonetheless, I think still green shoots here that we see, and still, fortunately, companies responding relatively well onto data. How does that play into public equity issuance? You know, we do find ourselves, frankly, down about 70% year over year, which was, you know, certainly a very robust first quarter of 2024, which drove a tremendous amount of momentum in the overall 2024 stats. But we've seen a much more moderate pace of overall deployment. There is still, I think, a fair amount of capital that is, you know, ready to be deployed, but it is much more infrequent, and we do see, you know, generalist investors largely on the sidelines. By and large across, right, ophthalmology, I don't see any particular differences in the overall trends within the public markets. For those companies that are generating, you know, positive data, we still have seen, you know, an ability for those companies to get access to capital, but far fewer opportunistic financings, and, you know, a level that is still kind of closer to where we were during the financial crisis or thereabouts. Then as it relates to the private side, I think kind of the most interesting element to this is really the 443 that you see under the 2021 bucket. Every other year, it's about 200. Yes, 2020, we saw 300 companies. But frankly, an oversupply of biotech companies and simply a similar amount of capital, or if not actually more, devoted to biotech, but too many mouths to feed, and that's why you do see a lot of news out there about down rounds or pressure, or it's much harder to raise capital because there are simply so many companies trying to do it. We do note, however, there still have been, you know, a number of very successful financings within ophthalmology, certainly at a slower pace, but, you know, nothing that we see, you know, very different from other fields. And then lastly, from an M&A landscape perspective, you know, from a banking perspective, we love to talk about those big deals that mark up the $10 billion plus, those dotted lines. But the reality is when you really look through sort of the steady state, the billion, you know, even 250 to $10 billion deals, that still remains pretty consistent. And I think the big takeaway is larger pharma companies still have available capital. They are going to want growth, and when companies do de-risk and do get closer to proving out that they have meaningful products and meaningful impact for patients, there are people willing to buy those assets. And so that, frankly, you know, still remains, I would say, a huge tailwind across not only ophthalmology, but all the whole field.
That's great, thank you. I have to give some more breaking news because the whole FDA had shifted, so I think we need to talk about it just for a second before we get into the rest of the topic. New administration, new CBER director, new CDER director. I don't know how much you guys have been watching the news. The new CDER director actually was the CEO of Horizon before, so I feel like there's a little bit of hope there that somebody's coming with drug development background. And then Vinay Prasad on the CBER side has been a controversial figure, epidemiologist, trained at NIH, hematology oncologist, but made some very controversial statements coming into the FDA. He talked about Sarepta that's going through a lot of process right now in terms of they took the product off the market, they put it back on the market. The last week has been a total mess. And they're talking about a big picture that they're going to remove red tape, but in the last month, there were 4 CRLs. Ultragenyx, Genentech received a CRL because they didn't have enough patients in the US. I think there's a nationalistic agenda that's happening that's also driving a lot of this political agenda on top of it, and then where does the science fit in this, right? So you take that whole big picture. I'm going to go to Laura. How do you view your investments today from a standpoint of risk, the uncertainty that you're dealing with on a regulatory standpoint, and when you think about private and public companies?
Yeah, I mean, so generally over the last few years, we've remained quite active and actually see this period of extreme negative positioning and depressed valuations as a huge opportunity if you have a long-term mindset investment horizon. So a lot of the money, particularly in the public market right now, is very short-term minded, kind of very sensitive to this volatility. So we want to take advantage of some of these misvaluations. At the same time, in terms of shifting around investment strategy, there are a lot of public funds that have reallocated their exposure to only going into commercial names or into large pharma with less volatility. For better or for worse, we have not done that and have kept our focus on small cap biotech. But in this restricted capital markets environment, the cost of capital and cash needs is more important than ever. So we definitely start to have a much more of a preference for companies that have line of sight to profitability and or a strategic BD plan where they can get to that point with non-dilutive capital and partnerships.
And James, how do you view the world right now as a private investor that has a very different thesis and access to capital, right? I mean, Laura is at Redmile, it's over $6 billion under AUM. It's a very different approach and a long-term view. How are you viewing life today?
It's not great. And listen, it's a challenging environment. We started the day off with this. But if I had to sum it up, in addition to all of the issues that you mentioned, the geopolitical risks, the regulatory uncertainty, you also have to look at the liquidity issue. Right, so even if you were to take all of that away, in the private markets, there's still a huge liquidity problem, right? Until some of these companies exits and some of this capital is recycled by our LPs, we're not going to have much money to invest. And that's the constant refrain from LPs, saying, I'm way over allocated to privates, I'm way over allocated to biopharma, I'm happy with what you guys have done, your DPI is quite good, but elsewhere, I need liquidity. So, and Laura mentioned, right, that looking at public markets, even us, if you think about liquidity, if you have limited dollars to invest, some of the opportunities in the public markets are so good and so compelling that you will happily invest in companies that are public just so you remove that liquidity risk off the table.
I'm going to get to a generalist question for you, Cameron, because you get to see the whole world. So what are the generalist investors waiting for right now? And from your perspective, what changes do need to shift as a sentiment for capital to be deployed again?
So one of the things that certainly will help, we do have a tremendous focus on a rate environment, but also the comparative performance of other sectors and where they've been able to invest. And so it is slightly cyclical, right? But we see generalists typically come into the market when there has been a wave of outperformance, within the specialist community. And so I do think it requires specialists, frankly, to continue to take longer-term bets and to start buying companies in the open market where they feel that there's a limited opportunity, right, to get in the door. But right now, right, there isn't that competitive tension. And I think both from a specialist perspective as well as generalist perspective, we're seeing folks willing to actually give up those returns into events or into earnings and into other these things to, frankly, prefer the stability and the predictability, right, of investing on the back end of those. And so, certainly it is going to, I think, come a little bit from the specialist community and then bleed into the generalist community.
Firas, I'm going to have you ask a couple of questions. I have two questions that I want to wrap up with after you.
Okay. Maybe I'll skip to the, we're short on time. Can I skip to the latter part?
You can do whatever you want.
You covered some policy things already. I was going to go policy, but I want to get to the ophthalmology specific area because that's all I know, actually. The rest is for you guys. Look, the anti-VEGF market has been absurd and huge, and we're all aware of that here. Are we at the top? Is there still room to grow in that area, one? And two, James and I talk about how high the bar has been set by these great drugs that I inject, thousands of times a year. Is the bar so high that competition is no longer valid or relevant? And specifically, how do you see the future new modalities fitting into the larger market, the new things like gene and cell therapy, the TKIs, the bi and tri-specifics? What kind of market share do you see and what kind of time frame in the overall anti-VEGF world? Laura, you want to start?
Yeah, in terms of the market and room for growth, you heard today so many stats about the dropout rates and lack of adherence. So if you think about the adherence-adjusted populations that are being treated, we're not even having, a minority of that percentage addressed right now. So I think that's why these new modalities are more important than ever. As you extend the treatment durations, you can increase the amount of patients that are able to stay on treatment, on protocol, and continue their treatment for years and years. Also, and I think a really important part of these new modalities is they'll allow us to be able to go earlier in treatment and expand the populations in that way.
And I think certainly around, one of the interesting elements is looking actually how quickly the market shifted towards Vabysmo. And granted, right, Roche had an advantage in that already held the rights to Lucentis in terms of how they could see the market and make changes. But I think it is going to be a market where I would absolutely not say, and it'd be crazy to say it given the amount of investment, across the field. And so people much smarter than me are making that bet. But it will very much come down to the clinical data, and I do think it's going to get harder and harder to differentiate. And so I think it will be very important for companies to be very clear in their value proposition and how they're going to compete. And I take this from strategic dialogue and others, like what is going to get somebody to truly react and say, I actually need this to be in my portfolio. It's going to be a different angle. And so whether or not that's through a much more aggressive study design or trying to pick a particular patient population or going head-to-head against somebody else. Like, these are all things that I do think it is going to be harder in anti-VEGF land and in the anti-VEGF mediated diseases if you're also addressing them with new mechanisms. And that's just, the game that is being played now. And also, will probably happen faster in GA, where there still is, a tremendous amount of opportunity.
James, what do you think on the private side? What about that conversation you and I always have about investing? We're early stage investors. The bar is high. These are big companies with multi-billion-dollar products. What's the future there? Can investments be made in early stage competitors?
Yes, I think so. I think you still can, but you have to, to Cameron's point, have a very clear value proposition on what else you are solving. Is it the duration issue? We've clearly seen that Vabysmo has taken market share, and duration is still a key element. We had a whole section on drug delivery today that showed that market share. And if you're solving other challenges, is it a bispecific or trispecific that also targets GA? Or is it solving atrophy or subretinal scarring? I'm now just parroting Faraz's words back to me because I ask him these hard questions.
James has done a retina fellowship in the last 2 years, 12 years. He's a little slow. Most of them are 2 years, but he's taken 12, but he's ready to peel membranes next week. Thanks, James. You're the best. I'm going to leave it for you, man. 5 minutes. You got it.
I'm just going to follow up on that a bit. I think we talked a lot about cell therapies today, gene therapies, especially when we start getting into IRDs and stuff. And I'm going to bring a view on a risk basis that, recently Capricor, which is a company in DMD, got a CRL it's a cell therapy company, and they got a CRL for CMC. In cell therapies, CMC continues to be an issue. I think gene therapies have solved it to a better extent than cell therapies. It still is an issue. And so that's one CRL that was based on CMC in a very high unmet need patient population. Replimune in advanced melanoma got rejected because the FDA felt like there wasn't enough risk-benefit, though they met everything that they negotiated on the clinical trial. And Genentech was a surprise, actually, that they denied it based on 10% of patients only being in the US. So as this group thinks about what's happening at the FDA right now, I think it's really important to understand how you think about developing drugs and the risk that's associated with the new view that the FDA is taking. How do you guys think, Laura, how do you invest now, just given the uncertainty of the FDA policies, the broader statements versus the actions right now when you start thinking about investing into different companies?
Yeah, it's been really difficult because what we've been trying not to do is let the fear of the worst case scenarios paint our decisions. And despite there being some delays and some of these kind of surprise rejections that we've been kind of personally hit by, overall, the worst case scenario has not played out. And the FDA has been communicative in their intentions. And I think one thing that we've noticed about this administration as a whole and the FDA is they tell you what they're going to do. And so, for instance, Vinay Prasad tweeted that he didn't like oncolytic viruses. Replimune got rejected. And so I do think there's time to adapt to this new norm, and eventually we're going to get much better about predicting the outcomes and the actions of the FDA. I also really hope that the FDA kind of makes good on their own promises that they're doing in these tours and podcasts in terms of their transparency, their commitment to accelerated approvals, and start to really increase that communication between not just the FDA and the public, but review teams and sponsors.
It's interesting because a lot of these companies didn't get that view during their mid and late cycle views. They went through the whole review process,
Right.
and during both mid and late cycle reviews, they had no idea that this was coming, right? So it's the risk assessment through the process. I guess, Cameron, you've been probably talking to a lot of companies. What's the view out there right now from investors and companies?
Yeah, so it's been a big mix, actually. We've had still a number of companies saying the engagement has been there, we're getting good advice, the people are still there, the people we've been dealing with for years are still there. But there are still surprises, and I think there has been a debate as to whether or not, right, truly in the background, right, some of these changes are truly making an impact. And I think that's what's made a difference, right, even going back to your generalist comments, is, there is a desire. It's like, I just want to know the rules of the game. And I don't want there to be further surprises. I don't need Stat News actually doing, frankly, pretty darn good work to get things out of the FDA and to bring them to light. I don't want that. I just want a predictable FDA, which in some cases they're trying to do with the podcast, and they're trying to do that. And so, but there's time to determine whether or not that's actually going to come into effect or if it's just posture.
So just around that, I want all the three of you answering this question. So what can companies do now to survive and attract capital, both on the public side and the private side? James, you wanna start?
Partnerships, figure out ways to stay alive, particularly early stage companies, right? Figure out how you can leverage whatever you have, whatever data set you have to get non-dilutive capital and partnerships in the door. Talking our own book here, but Ravana, obviously, with that recent press release yesterday, really did a good job there. So that's what it's going to take to get the investors off the sidelines and taking a look at you.
Well, the strategics are coming next, so we'll ask those questions too.
We're going to pin them down to that. Look out, Hallen. Coming for you.
Yeah, to that exact point, I think it's making the hard resource allocation decisions and making them early before your back is against the wall and you have no choice. Prioritizing your lead assets with the highest potential, and then when you get to the point where you're monetizing those, then you can feed that back into the pipeline and the platform.
Yeah, largely agree, right? Deeply understand where you're differentiated. Continue to execute on that. I mean, enroll quickly and move fast, because also the underlying burn of a company starts to creep up. And so operating as efficiently as possible still remains, critical for biotech.
That's great, isn't it? What would you guys think?
That was amazing. You
Time's
did it
run
like
out. We did a
literally
pretty
on the
good job.
second.
Thank you for traveling and taking on this. And Cameron, I know all the stats you pulled together for free. I appreciate it. And Laura, thanks for traveling. James, you're already here, so it worked out really well. Thank you.
Yeah, James stepped in for a missing party. Yeah. Thank you all. That was wonderful. Thank you. Why don't we start with you guys each introducing yourself. Paul, why don't you start? There's a mic on the chair for you, I think.
I've got a new title. It's called VP and Distinguished Fellow. I think it has something to do.
Distinguished?
Yeah, it has something to do with the gray that we both share.
So I get distinguished then too?
No.
You still have a little more pepper than salt. Yeah. I'm pretty much salt now.
Yes, and once you get salt, you've earned it.
Salt is all the way.
Well, at least we have hair. But anyway,
I earned it a long time ago.
It's the last session of the day. There'll be hair jokes, all kind of stuff. It's okay.
So anyway, you're supposed to tell my role. So I direct innovation in retina and cataract, and I don't have to do the downstream SHIT anymore, just innovation.
But are you involved in seeking M&A partnerships and things?
Yes.
Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
It does. Hi, everybody. I'm Nida Sen. I'm an ophthalmologist by training, still somewhat in practice. I'm the Ophthalmology Strategy and Development Head at Sanofi. And I was at NIH for 14 years, then Janssen for a few years before joining Sanofi about 2.5 years ago.
How do you do? Julian Smith. I'm I trained originally scientifically in chemistry, biochemistry, but I've worked all my life in sales and marketing in the pharma business. Now I work for AbbVie. I'm the lead for the eye care. We have a portfolio or commercialization strategy. So I get involved in internal, selecting where we should be, where to play, how to win, but also in external innovation, diligences, business development, that kind of advice, but from a commercial perspective.
Hi, I'm Wayne Caulder. I'm VP and General Manager at Bausch Lomb Surgical, responsible primarily for North America, but not just the commercial aspects, but really all thing about the business of surgical. And at Bausch Lomb, it's categorized really with retina, cataract, glaucoma, and refractive. And Bausch being one of the strategics that support ophthalmology, we have the luxury, of course, of having a large portfolio, and a lot of things we're going to talk about today. We may have those products in the U.S. or we may have them outside the U.S., so that gives us some benefit in terms of thinking about the future, internal products, but also external.
We've already done our introductions.
No, we won't introduce. I'm going to get us started this time, and I'm going to pick up a little bit where my section we left off with the last group, which is on the so-called ophthalmology-specific outlook. And I asked them about anti-VEGF and room for market growth, et cetera. I'm going to take the next question to you guys, which is, do we have another $10 billion market out there? Is GA that, or is dry AMD only that if we get to intermediate AMD? That's maybe my thinking, maybe not. But Paul, why don't you start us? Is that the next $10 billion market?
I got it right here. It's dry AMD, but it's actually both, and I think you need two sets of technologies. One for intermediate and early because of the benefit-risk ratio. And then when you get to GA, hopefully we can prevent it with the first technology. If not, I think it's going to be optogenetics. I like the intravitreal injection capability of that and the ability to restore photosensing.
So you like an approach to both early stage and late stage, and they'll sort of work together. How about diagnostics? You're into the world of diagnostics.
Yeah,
do we need better stuff?
Yeah, we've got a really good one. It's multispectral imaging, so it uses 10 different wavelengths, one at a time, monochromatic images, and we can see disease markers. We'll use it first in dry AMD. It instantly measures the drusen and the quantity and the entry criteria for photobiomodulation, but it's really a platform for all retina diseases, and the AI is just amazing.
Nida?
Thank you. I do think dry AMD definitely has potential for growth. It is disease-modifying therapy. I think earlier panelists have mentioned that as well. So the growth may be slower than wet AMD. It won't be the floodgates opening one day. And certainly some countries probably don't want the floodgates opening in one day. But I think that it is going to take a lot of education, both for patients, physicians, all of us, really. If you look at some of the non-ophthalmology disease areas, Alzheimer, MS, have incurred similar growth, but it was a lot slower than wet AMD. So I agree with earlier disease intervention as well, but that will definitely take a different, much more conservative TPP, so to speak, to convince physicians and patients to intervene at that stage. And perhaps a segment of those patients would be more amenable to treatment. I'm speaking as a physician here, to receive an invasive therapy, however safe it may be, than somebody that is 10 years away from developing the advanced form of the disease. So I think we will get there because there's a need. I do think that our North Star in that regard has not changed. If we can find meaningful therapies that have an impact on the patient's daily life, I think we'll get there.
So there's undoubtedly huge unmet need, right? I get that. I don't think you can can you put a dollar value on that? Well, in that kind of a multi-billion-dollar market, I think the short answer is yes. I agree with the time it will take to develop this market, because if you think about it, we're kind of at the infancy in terms of the drugs that have just been approved, and it's the nature of the disease. Folks can continue with reasonable functional vision for a surprisingly long time, And they may have other comorbidities. They may get, neovascular AMD before they willingly start to present and are willing to commit. And physicians as well. Up until recently, you've not had the opportunity to actually treat a patient. You have to sort of watch and wait, which is kind of fundamentally depressing. So there's been an initial bolus, but even now we see in the first, as the market starts to mature, be it so small, getting patients, the retention is not as good as we'd hoped. And we see that from early data. But it's not surprising because in the real world, patients have more comorbidities. The dreaded, we talked so many times in the meeting today about persistency, retention on the therapy, and the burden of therapy. Well, when you've got a relatively asymptomatic disease like this, it's not surprising. So the short answer is yes, because the need is there, but I think technology and the science will come good, but maybe it'll be way slower than it was for such a symptomatic relief that you got when you can increase lines of vision within a few days. So that's our position. That's how we look at it.
Wayne, what do you think?
Yeah, I would just add to the comments that have already been made is, not all ideas are invented at Bausch Lomb. We know that. So a lot of great ideas come from the people in this audience. In fact, I had a meeting this morning, earlier this afternoon, and happened to be one of the folks that were here attending. Great ideas about what can happen in the back of the eye and how industry companies can support that. And so we know that those ideas come from all kinds of places, and I think that's important for particularly strategics, but even smaller companies who are getting started, is to remember that good ideas are everywhere, to be receptive, to listen to those ideas, and then to act on those ideas. And the investment that it takes to do that, everyone in here knows that it's the long play, it's not the short play. But I do agree that there's a future for everything we're talking about, and excited about that. I've been in the industry since the 1900s. Some of you have as well, as I look around the room. And I can remember back in even 10, 20 years ago, the concern about where is retina headed and what are we going to do about it. And then look at all that's happened, just in pick a benchmark, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and how your practice, your surgical skills, your techniques, your technology that you've chosen and adapted, how that's helped and embraced patient care all across the world.
Yeah, can I just add one point as well? We heard today, in this kind of scenario, when you have this fairly heterogeneous population, we heard about use of biomarkers to stratify for obviously the patients who are at highest risk of progression. That's the way to go, especially in countries, dare I say, outside the US, where you have more sophisticated health technology assessment, where you just have to show a benefit to vision. That's the way this area will increase. So that, and the second one, which was, again, we've heard multiple times today, was on the duration of effect. The day we have drugs that work for 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 months, boom, that's going to be great because it's a slightly more asymptomatic condition.
I agree totally. I had a quick follow-on before I turn it over to you, brother. Is that okay?
Please.
I wanted to start with Wayne because you sort of led me to the other question I wanted to come to in this section, which is, I opened the morning talking about, and then we heard a lot of great stuff today, regenerative medicine, cell therapy, gene therapies. For a decade, those of us who practice retina have been hearing the questions from our patients. Oh, come on, I keep hearing it. We're never getting there, doctor. They're frustrated because I tell them, hey, we're coming with trials. Are we there? How is industry viewing this new frontier in retina, in medicine in general, with gene therapies and cell therapies, so many clinical stage companies now? What do you think?
Yeah, I would just say, at least from a Bausch Lomb perspective, earlier this year, we made investments in early stage companies, both for AMD as well as GA, and even company that is working with AI for drug development. So we're very focused on the back of the eye and where that will lead technology and innovation. So we're open to that, and we see that as really the best way to go going forward. Raise your hand in this audience if you have someone you care about that's affected by retina disease, right? And it's debilitating, and the quality of life of that patient changes dramatically. And if you have someone in your life and you're becoming that caregiver, you see firsthand. And of course, ophthalmologists in the room, retina specialists know this as well. But it is serious, and we take it very seriously.
What do you guys think? Julian, why don't you come down the aisle?
So we heard from Neurotech today, from Sal, but I can speak very positively about gene therapy. in a very short story, about 5 years ago, we didn't see the opportunity. I was originally Allergan, now AbbVie. We tried to bring a longer-acting anti-VEGF to market, failed. That's the price of doing business. We very quickly looked at external innovation. We didn't see an opportunity at the time, because getting into this retina space, this highest growth space in eye care, was a fundamental part of the plan. But we did see what the burgeoning technology for gene therapy. So we took a position, a very pleasant one, with REGENXBIO, because we predicted that they would likely be first to market. There was still a lot of unknowns. I think we might end up talking about structuring deals to mitigate for risks, but we knew that for a particular part of that population, gene therapy will fit perfectly in the strategy. It's not going to be maybe your everyday in-office procedure until we perfect that, but that was exactly why a large strategic like AbbVie saw that, did the diligence, and then went hell for leather to try and partner with someone who was at the forefront, which at the time was REGENXBIO. There'll be many followers through, but we would likely be the first to market.
Nida, what do you think?
Well, we're in a pleasant situation of having multiple late-stage trials with gene therapy, subretinal and suprachoroidal, and intravitreal for DMT at Verum. And obviously, Sanofi is newer to the ophthalmology space, but we also have gene therapies both in wet AMD and dry AMD. I do think that durability is needed in both forms of AMD for different reasons, but especially for GA, for the reasons that all of us have mentioned, as at its at least earlier stages as a more modestly symptomatic disease, durability in terms of patient retention and the efficacy duration will be really key. Cell therapy is still evolving, but gene therapy, I think, has at least grown through the initial pains and figured some of the hurdles along the way.
So I think subretinal injection is problematic from where you participate and do that, and then leakage and a lot of things. These drugs are super expensive. I like optogenetics for that reason. There's one out there that's an intravitreal injection. I like the gene agnostic nature of it. If you have damaged photoreceptors, you can replace those with non-human photocells in a day. So it's also very rapid. And so that's just out of this world, really. Cell therapies, great progress. I think rejection's a problem. I think the organization and delivery of it's a problem. I think it's just going to be a problem.
You think it's too complicated for prime time yet?
Yeah, I mean, they should keep trying, absolutely, but it's got to be pluripotent stem cells. I think you got to figure out a way to deliver it. I know Mark Humine has a scaffold. I know the NIH was trying to insert those, and they struggled. I think Steve Charles has worked with a pretty good surgeon.
The patch, RPT.
Yeah. So it just seems like a lot of problems. I hope they get it done, but
we're trying.
I would rely on
working hard on that
something
one.
else. So
I get the point, and I think regulatory-wise, there's still there's a lot of questions about what's going to be the regulatory path. Please, Julian.
I was just going to add briefly. I know it's a retina meeting, but the technology, the rising boat lifts all. I think for pluripotent autologous for corneal cells, I think we're nearly there. So, and that will help. It helps with production, the distribution, managing the ways that you physically book these patients in. So it doesn't really matter that it's outside of retina. It's coming, but it's probably more complicated to get it to the back of the eye.
Agree. Ram, please.
Yeah, so I'm gonna push you guys a little bit to talk about the business side. I think we talked a lot about unmet need, and there are a lot of people here in the audience that are looking to understand what's going on behind the doors at strategics that are thinking about making these decisions on an investment basis. I mean, it's a interesting dichotomy here, right? So Paul's predominantly surgical, Sanofi. Paul Hudson coming from Novartis, interest in ophthalmology. He knows how good it is and what it could do with the Novartis franchise. AbbVie, obviously, it's an acquisition that came through, and I have the opportunity to sit with Julian on the joint commercialization committee, and I get to gather some of their thinking. So I won't ask him those questions because I know they're thinking a bit more. And for you, you're both in front of the eye and back of the eye, right? So is Paul, front and back of the eye. So back of the eye is very intensive capital that you need. I mean, you have to really plan for all the way through phase 3, the most expensive development program that you can think about in ophthalmology. Timelines are long, risk is much higher. So a lot of money, a lot of time, but if you get there, you just need one product to build an entire company, right? On the other side, for front of the eye, 2 to 3 month endpoints, small trials, small capital, you could do multiple bets. How are you guys making these decisions when you sit behind in your forums of thinking about retina decisions versus front of the eye decisions, and for somebody like you and Paul, you're also thinking surgical, right? Them both are more about the biotech and the pharma industry, generally speaking, and the affordability components also kick in. So I would love for each one of you to tell us your thinking so people can understand how you're thinking to approach you, right? Because I think which strategic you approach is a very important concept as part of this process.
Okay. So number one, I think for Alcon, it's business as usual. This environmental question doesn't really matter to us. We've had a Constellation machine out there for 17 years. It's time to replace it, right? So we go through that process. We spend a truckload of money. We listen to a lot of people, like Christina Wang, who was in the back of the room. Get a lot of feedback from you as well, and a co-inventor, I might add. But anyway, the Unity VCS is out. I'm turning my total focus to the retina office. So the Unity it's a masterpiece. It's Bitcoin, right? But externally, we just followed the data, looking at the largest unmet need, which is dry AMD, and we've recently announced that we intend to acquire Lumithera. Never thought it would work, but you got to follow the data, and sure enough, the data is super robust, and that's going to happen. So I think we had our core technology that we just reflexively do, but then we got to look at the market, the unmet need, and go after the biggest opportunities there are. So that's the mindset.
So Paul, I'm going to push you a little bit there, just because you guys were probably one of the pioneers that most people don't know in dry AMD with Retain. I mean, this was 20 years ago, right?
When we met, actually.
When we met, yeah. And it was one of the largest AMD trials ever. That was going to be Alcon's entry into pharma. Now you come to Lumithera, it's a device play. Mm-hmm. So should we be thinking about Alcon as being more comfortable in your core competencies of device and surgical, or would you actually make a play in pharma?
So I think of myself being in retina, I'm a pharma guy, I'm a surgical guy. Those are tools you use to solve the problem, optogenetics, whatever it is, vitamins, whatever it takes. But we look at what are the most unmet needs for patients and surgeons and solve those somehow. And don't try to guess, just follow the data.
Great. Nida, so it's new for you coming into Sanofi. You guys have declared that you're going to go into retina seriously, and then you're showing that. You haven't actually gone out to do any late stage, mid stage acquisitions. You're playing the early game. So what's the big game here for Sanofi? Is this a 10-year play, 5-year play? You're looking for something on a late stage? We've got a few companies that are public right now that will be reading out coin flip next year. Data is going to come out. You got something significant or not? If it's significant, would Sanofi consider that type of acquisition?
Well, I'm going to have to walk the line of working for a big pharma. And
No, we're going to push you.
I am on the R&D side.
I warned Ram about this.
They're under NDA.
Obviously, we're in retina. And for us, it's important to maintain focus. We are early, as you said. We want to maintain focus. And also a couple of considerations for us are, I suspect it's the same for a lot of companies, is that it has to align with our internal core capabilities, scientifically, strategically, corporate strategy, as well as the scientific strategy, but also commercially, where does it make sense for us in terms of how that commercial build goes? Again, I'm coming from the non-commercial person. And for us, that's retina for now. That doesn't mean we won't do something else, but for now, I can speak that we are highly interested in retina, innovative therapies where there's high unmet need.
You are walking the line.
I am walking the line.
It was a good but safe answer. We'll take it.
I want to keep my job
I
for a
understand.
while.
And
Tough when you're
Julian,
battling public companies up here. Right? You can bring James up here. He's in the private world. You can get him to say anything. Well, maybe not anything. Sorry, James. But the public company's different. Go ahead, Ram.
and Julian, I have a little bit of a different question for you. AbbVie is huge in immunology, oncology, neurology. Those are your drivers. So how does ophthalmology fit into it outside of REGENXBIO, which is the greatest deal you guys ever made? It's outside of that, how do you guys think about ophthalmology in the context of competing for resources in the organization against all these other, chronic therapeutic areas that are bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars a day into AbbVie, right? So where does this fit? How do you guys look at your life?
So well observed. Eye care is not the largest segment, but it is a determined growth pillar. We say that every quarter and every quarter call. So you just take your time and you bide, but you have a strategy. And it was only 5 years ago that we were bought by AbbVie for an obvious reason. The good thing about the pharma world, it's all very public. There's a crystal ball. We all know what everyone's doing to a degree. AbbVie determined that we needed to de-risk and to diversify. So they did that by buying Allergan for different TAs. That was 5 years ago. There's no change. We have an annual process. We all get to meet the CEO. We talk about our plans. That was only a month or two ago. There is no change, and I'll be boring here and say, yeah, retina is at the forefront because of the size of the market, the potential for growth. But we work across dry eye, glaucoma, and retina. As you know, we might get a Christmas present on the dry eye front from Aldira, which is the PDUFA then. It's a relatively small market. It's quite a diversified one. It's not too differentiated these days. You're talking maybe a couple of $100 million size at peaks. Glaucoma is probably, glaucoma neuroprotection, the next mega blockbuster that comes around. Who can solve for that? So there's a cross-fertilization with the classic retina space there. We have exactly the same issues in glaucoma with patients who can't retain. They can't keep on therapy. It's an asymptomatic condition when you're trying to lower pressure. So implants for pressure over a long time, reintroduction of implants every 6-12 months is where it's at for glaucoma and neuroprotection, and that bleeds directly into retina. So our key growth strategy is within the retina space, and I don't need to say what they are. The markets that we've all discussed today, the duration of therapy, AbbVie will do exactly what AbbVie does, and it will make a play when it sees the right kind of deal. There's no such thing as bad weather, just the wrong type of clothes. If you're not there at the right time, things don't happen. But I'll give you examples for Cerevel, $8.9 billion deal back in 24. That's what AbbVie does. Perfect fit for that was for our neuroscience category. Do you know what? Didn't always work out. So you place your money, you take your bets, but you have to de-risk as much as possible, and we're doing exactly that in eye care.
And Wayne, I know Bausch Lomb has been talking about retina. I personally haven't seen any major investments. Maybe you can tell us how you're planning to do that entry into retina, right? I think of you today as Xiidra. I think of you as a company that has a pharma business in dry eye and a retina business in surgical. What is the plan to really progress in retina for you? Are you guys looking for early, mid-stage, late stage? Do you want to make a splash, or do you want to build this very slowly?
Great question. Many of you know Brent Saunders. He's the CEO of Bausch Lomb, and he likes to go shopping. And so he's constantly looking, as you said.
We know him.
As you know, and he likes to sell things too sometimes. I mentioned earlier in the year we made some significant early investments in companies. And in the last year, we've invested in glaucoma with Elios. We've invested in dry eye, as you mentioned, with Trucara. So those are two examples of significant acquisitions that have been made, and there are other things that I can't talk about that are being discussed internally that will help shape Bausch & Lomb for the future, specific to retina, and really trying to, as a matter of fact, at this meeting this week, as we move forward, we'll be talking to a lot of you, surgeons, on what your thoughts are about the future for retina and how Bausch & Lomb can work as your partner to take care of your patients, because for us, it starts with the patient, right? And so you, the ophthalmologist, the retina specialist, we want to partner with you to help take care of that patient. And so what is driving that behavior? What is needed? We all need that investment dollar, and we're looking for partnerships as well, because as I said early on, we don't have all the best ideas, and we're keeping our eyes and ears open for those other companies that are out there that are also looking for strategic partnerships to help drive what the future of retina may be.
So Firas, I have one question. Should
You
we
go.
ask for-
I'll close out when you're
Okay,
done. man.
okay. So just to
go.
follow up on what you guys all said, I'm going to try to bring the relevance back to the people that are in the crowd, and we got the investment community, we got the entrepreneurs, we've got companies that are very early stage that are progressing towards IND, that have data in the clinic. What do you think, and I would love to get each one of your opinions separately and in very short answers, what would you give as an advice to the company that they were doing differently today that would make them an attractive company, an asset for you to partner with, agnostic to the stage, right? Early, mid, late, and I'm going to mostly focus on early and mid because late is a very different story. The magnitude of those acquisitions and what you have to pay and the risk assessments are different. Maybe you talk about early, and then if you have some time, talk about mid-stage too.
I'll jump in. I would just say that we'll start with the data, right? If the data looks very promising and looks good, that's going to help drive some early decisions. Look, we'd all love to have that clarity for the next 10 years without any risk of making a bad decision, but we know that that's not the case. And so sometimes you have to make decisions based on the best knowledge that you have at that moment. And usually, typically, that's based on data. So I think for us, it will start with the data, depending on where that company or that partner is, whether it's early stage, mid stage, or even an acquisition partner, how that data is looking and what the market is responding.
Financially, what should be the expectations for these companies? What type of structure that you would be offering, especially when you start thinking about an early stage partnering from a standpoint of the asset not being really de-risked into the clinic, right? So what
Well, I could just give a quick example. Again, I go back to the two acquisitions that have been made earlier in the last year. TrueCara was an acquisition where we bought the company and the people, right? And then Elios is a company where we bought the technology and some of the people. So it really does depend on how that company is structured and commercialized.
Okay. Julian?
I know we're at time. I'll
but
keep
it's
it
okay.
quick.
We're the last
Okay.
session. We're the last
The
session, so.
They're just going to
traditional
drink after.
philosophy was that you got to kiss a lot of frogs until you find your prince.
Which frog should they be kissing?
So technically, that is not the mantra of today. What you need to do is do your homework. It's more like online dating. You need to come to meetings like this. You need to be willing to tell a story. Everyone, it's like pitching a screenplay to a producer, and I don't mean that as a disservice to the data. Make it easy for people to understand because it's a win-win situation. And a large strategic like I work for, if we have a gap, which I'm okay to say we do, we would like to fill that. And it's a win-win situation. So just meet as often as you can, have your story concise and very, very tight.
Come to OIS every meeting.
That was your takeaway.
That's the message, right? Nida?
Well, I agree. Stories supported with the data and differentiation, impact to patient supported by the data, regardless of the stage.
Paul, I'll give you a second
Yeah,
chance at the last word.
Well, I just want to let you know I objected to the form of Ram's question. It was kind of like inside out, you know. I'm sure you'll get better. But anyway, the way we do it is we
This
play.
is a long story between them.
Yeah, long story. We place bets, we de-risk, and then we acquire. It's real simple, but that's the pathway. So anyway, we'll synchronize better next time.
I think we are out of time. You want to have a final word?
No, that's a good message. But Firas, you have the last word.
We're going to close out the meeting. So thanks to all of these guys. And we have to cut it off now because if this session went any longer, Julian's metaphors might have gotten X-rated. He went from kissing the frog to speed dating. And after that, we don't know where he was going next. So good job. Anyway, this is it for this session. Thank you, panelists. Thank you all for staying till 5:47. We were only 2 minutes over for the entire day. That's not bad. Go have vodka on the rocks or whatever. It's on ROM, actually. So thank you for coming. Have a good one.
Not true at all.